Yay.
Hello guys, welcome to Making the Rounds. If you notice that we have someone sandwiched roughly between us, I have a bit of an overlay issue, so I'm really sorry. Xander, if you stand up really tall, you'll look bigger. The point is that we were originally going to do this with the 4 people from ESPN. So if you don't know, the people who did the ESPN power rankings for players, top, jungle, mid, ADC, and support, are myself, Emily Rand, Xander Torres, and Tyler Erdsberger. I'm probably mispronouncing his name, but everyone knows him as Fion anyway, so no one cares.
Yeah, indeed.
I couldn't get a hold of Fion, but I wanted to put together this panel and have the discussion that theoretically should have happened before the list was released, so that we could kind of like ham out who belongs where. And obviously we're not going to come to a different consensus because that would take too long, but I wanted to go ahead and look at some of the discrepancies that we had on each of our individual lists and talk about kind of where they came from. And I thought that that would be a fun thing to do. So first of all, let's talk about the top lane. And the final list for top lane that came out was Cuvee, Khan, Flame, Haunter, and then we had, I believe, Ziv tied with 957, and we had Soaz and Alfari as honorable mention. So first of all, we don't really have Tyler here, and he was the only one who put Khan #1, as opposed to Cuvee, 'cause the rest of us all voted Cuvee. But anyway, I'm gonna kind of ask anyway, why did you guys put Cuvee over Khan?
I really value Cuvee's contribution to Samsung. Even when the team was struggling, I feel like Cuvee was still performing really well. I'm in the middle of writing a piece on him, but I've been going back and watching a lot of his games, and I think, like, so this is coming from someone who rates him very highly, right? And when people usually think about Khan, they think of this, like, amazing laning prowess and the 1v1. And I was going back and looking at a lot of Cuvee's 1v1s, and he's actually had, like, some really sick outplays this year, which I had watched but apparently totally forgotten. So he also does have that potential, which is something that I think is a little bit underrated when people are talking about him as a player, because he is known a lot more for his team fighting. And I just think he brings a lot of value, and he's grown into this remarkably flexible player, which is kind of hilarious, because the first time I, like, really noticed Cuvee, it's when the OGN Observer was trolling him and, like, watching him split push on Lissandra randomly when, like, the rest of his team needed him, and it was super awkward. So he's evolved a lot. And again, just a lot of the times that I feel like Samsung could have lost a game because they were struggling through a lot of other issues on the team, Cuvee was the one to kind of drag them up and pull them out of it.
Yeah, pretty much. Cuvee is just, in his play, is a lot more flexible than Khan. Like, you see, he has the same 1v1 outplay potential, like you said, and because that's pretty much how he started. He was only like, I think he was like a Jace one trick when he actually started playing for Samsung in the first place. So he has that same potential. He just contributes a lot to Samsung in terms of, like, actual wave management and teleport plays, and I think he doesn't require as much attention for his playstyle to really flourish in comparison to Khan, and I think that's mainly why I put him #1.
So it sounds like we all kind of rate the fact that Cuvee is flexible. Was flexibility or versatility something that you guys necessarily prioritize? Because we didn't even write down, like, our individual criteria for these lists or anything.
It's something I prioritize in players.
Yeah, so is that something that you also rate, Xander, is versatility, flexibility?
Yeah, in general, flexibility is, like, a lot up there. Like, I value that a lot more than just straight carryability, like being able to carry on screen, I guess.
Was there a point on your list where you kind of went and you said, okay, this player is actually, like, not that versatile, but he's just so good at this particular role that I have to put him above this, like, other versatile player?
I guess that would be my 5 pick, which is Alfari. I think he's super good pretty much on carry roles. I guess you could compare him to Khan in terms of playstyle, but also just I just think he's another guy who actually knows how to bounce waves properly and actually puts good pressure on pretty much most matchups, and that's why I ended up favoring him over players like, I did consider Soaz as well, and Ziv from AHQ, obviously. who I thought I can speak more to Ziv, who like I kept out of the list because I feel like he was more susceptible to jungle pressure and got away with a lot more than pretty much most top laners on this list.
See, I kind of disagree with Alfari because I feel like there was a lot of attention devoted to top lane for a lot of the split, and like Maxlor actually put himself behind a lot to get wards on top side, and it was only when Misfits decided, oh, the meta is actually mid-bot, and stopped playing around him that they started looking better. And I don't necessarily think he performed as well with a lead. He's actually really Marin-esque. And
that's fair too.
I've talked to him, and he actually likes Marin a lot, and he builds like based on some of his champions based on Marin and stuff like this. So he doesn't necessarily react well when the team trades sides. This was a big problem. I think they got a lot better at it, and was susceptible to jungle ganks. So I had a lot of issues with Alfari the split, in particular. I think that he was a good laner in spring, especially, but in summer that sort of declined as well. I don't necessarily think the pool was good for him. So I don't know, that's kind of my issue with Alfari, but yeah.
That's fair. I guess again, a lot of benefit of the doubt in terms of like what Misfits can potentially do, because I think you'll see a lot more of it in Group D actually, especially since they're gonna have to play against Lodgels, who have a nice top laner.
Okay, Alfari versus MMD, right? Okay.
Yeah. They're gonna abuse that, or at least they should.
Yeah, it's good. There'll be another top laner that you put on the list that Emily and I didn't in Group D, which is Hanser. So
Hanser, hell yeah.
You put Hanser in 4th, and neither of us voted for Hanser either, so.
Yeah, Hanser. Alright, so to preface that, I don't think there's a huge gap between the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 top laners. Basically, like top lane pool isn't that good. I mean, we even have Flame number 3, which has a lot, I think, about the quality of top laners at this tournament. No offense to Flame, but it's I'm
very offensive to Flame intentionally.
But I just. On an international stage, I really value what Hanser brings because he can do pretty much anything and will do pretty much anything for TSM's success. I think he's great mechanically. Obviously, he performs pretty much on any champion you can put him on. I think he's really important actually to how they play team fights. Obviously, Bjergsen gets a lot of the credit because he should for the TSM's team fight prowess, but I think Hanser actually makes a lot of space for both his carries, and is a reason why Doublelift is more successful in team fights than he probably would be with another top laner.
I'm also really curious, like Emily, why you put Joe Uchi at number 3. And Joe Uchi, I mean 957.
Yeah. I think this was my like weirdest pick. I think of all the ranking lists I had. I would agree with Xander in that, like, I definitely, so if we had this discussion previously, I feel like this would have been argued down a lot. But I actually really see him as a flexible player and an important part of why Team WE is here, despite the fact that obviously people are, when they look at that team, they're more going to look at Mystic and Condi. So yeah, that was my reasoning, but I also like fully accept that I probably would have been convinced otherwise, I guess, if we had actually had this argument, because thinking about the other top laners, like, so I listed a 6th on each of mine, and I had Let Me as my 6th. And even that is like I'm kind of like, I don't know about that. I also put Ziv as my 5th, which I know like Xander didn't, for the reasons he stated. I put him there just because I think he is a huge part of HQ's success. So, I mean, I don't know. I guess I just really value, I think 957 is fairly flexible, and I value his contribution to that team, and I think some of it's pretty understated. Even though a lot of people who last watched him, I think will just remember, like, the Fizz and the Kled from MSI, probably. So that's not what you're going to see at this tournament, I would assume, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
But...
Here, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, that's why I rated him so highly. I also think... No, never mind. I'm done.
I think the thing about Joe too for me is just that he is most impactful on a few champions, and I feel like there's this problem with LPL players to an extent. Some of the really hyped ones, as we continue on the list, will have surprisingly smaller champion pools in terms of effectiveness. I think Jochi is really good on like Shen and Kled, Maokai to an extent, but for me, I don't necessarily see him having the same impact on other top laners, and I think that like Lemmy is probably a better LPL top laner overall in terms of flexibility and everything else than 957, but that's like my particular opinion, and I think that if you're talking about importance to team, maybe it makes more sense to put 957 on than Lemmy because of the way that the team operates and the way that the team functions. So I think we kind of got ahead of ourselves talking about the picks already. I want to ask if any of you had like a systemized criteria in your head, like rules you want to follow for rating each of the players as you went through and decided what you did. Like, what did you prioritize?
So I was looking at a lot of stuff, and it also depends on position. So like I'll straight up say that support is a little bit different just because that role is very different, and you often can't look at statistics to evaluate a support, right? And it's kind of similar. So a lot similar with junglers, but then at least you can look at pathing decisions and stuff like that. With supports, I was more looking at a lot of intangibles that I've either seen in person, in the case of Gorilla, or just things that where their teammates have come out and said, or like Sword Art also in person. And then recent performances, so regular summer season onward, I will say that like, and I know a lot of people were coming out and saying this of the lists as they came out, that it was very like recent heavy. And I know for me that was something that was kind of weighted maybe a little bit more highly than people would have liked, or maybe they would have ranked. Importance to team, and then finally, like, I did include this, but I'd say like among most things, it maybe matters the least, and again, depending on circumstance, but longevity of career and then prior domestic and international success. I think it's sometimes unfair for people to say like, oh, this player has done super well internationally, because international tournaments in League of Legends are really weird anyway, in terms of the way they shake out. So that's why I included domestic success in there as well.
I think, yeah, it's a good point. But Xander, what did you think? What did you have a criteria listed in your head, or did you not necessarily formulate it until you were done ranking?
I guess my thought process when it came into players was overall flexibility. And I appreciate players who can't be pigeonholed into like one specific role. So that's why like the higher players are going to be more flexible. Obviously with QV versus Con, that was a good example of that. And I think after that, I actually really weighed like the ability for a player to be a primary win condition, I suppose.
Sure.
So that's why I had someone like Alfari number 5 in top lane, even though maybe he isn't necessarily the best top laner, because I feel like he's someone that the Misfits could really use, even if it's not necessarily the best way to play right now, is a good way to win around him. And then after that, it was kind of just like consistent domestic success. I don't really weigh international success too much because, like Emily said, tournaments happen like every 6 months. You can literally anything could happen. As far as that, unless it's like a very consistent track record, both domestic and internationally. So, yeah, I guess just domestic pedigree after those two criteria.
I think for me, the big thing is that I tried to generally weight, most importantly, summer form, right? How they played and how well they did in the summer. Like, if you had a poor summer, just baseline, you didn't end up on my list. So I think I ended up excluding a lot of players that people were really upset about me excluding, like Crown, spoiler, Bang. Players like this didn't end up on my list because I thought that they were terrible in the summer split. And so for me, that was a really big problem. And then after that, I went into versatility, like how many different roles the player can play for the team. And then number 3, I had longevity of form. For me, to be a top player at Worlds, you have to have been to multiple Worlds. You have to have had like high level performance. Like, I think of this as great players at Worlds. Not necessarily, like, I think this was the big departure from me from the LoL Esports top 20 and maybe other top 20 or top player rankings, was that they wanted to rank players in terms of how they expected them to perform at this particular World Championship. I wanted to reward players who I just think are great or who have been great, especially recently. So that was, for me, like a big deal breaker. And then number 4, I did have like team impact in the back of my head. And that's why players like Sword Art ended up being rated over Gorilla in my head and things like this, was team impact and stuff like this. Okay, so that probably should have gone at the beginning of the video, but good stuff. Let's talk a little bit about jungle. I think we had the least argument about jungle stuff in particular, because all of us put blank number 1, right? Actually, Xander, was this I remember in the initial voting there was Peanut or something. Did you?
Oh, that was an accident. That was an accident.
I was just curious if there was something more to that.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
He's not good in this meta.
But then, why didn't any of us put Peanut on the list then?
So for me personally, watching Peanut struggle has been really sad for me, because I like him as a jungler. I like him a lot. And I rated him very highly going into last year's World Championship because of his performance. I don't know what it is with Peanut on SKT. He's very hesitant. He just seems to lack that same proactivity. I don't know if it's a team communication thing. He doesn't have the same impact. And then additionally, I will say him in this meta is not the greatest. Now that could change. So when I was looking at this list, I wasn't thinking about, I know a lot of people have said that Nidalee, Lee Sin are probably coming back, and that will actually make a huge difference if Peanut is able to play those champions, because those are things, 2 champions specifically that we've seen him perform on a really high level with. But when I looked at that, when I looked at team impact, it made me really sad to leave Peanut off this list, but that's why I didn't include him.
Yeah, for Peanut, for me, is mostly, it's kind of like the same thing with Huni, I guess, where you're like, just summer form just wasn't there, like, at all. Like, he didn't even play as much as he did before, and the meta thing is the one that strikes me as the most important, because when the most important junglers are going to be like Sejuani, Gragas, and stuff like that, he can't necessarily be the quote-unquote battle ward or whatever people like to call him, and it feels like he's just not as impactful in those champions, maybe, and it feels like in general with SKTs he's not very impactful at all, because I think there was a very specific system in Rocks that his laners played really aggressive and he was able to do very specific things, but he has an aggressive mid laner in Faker, sure, but it feels like he just never wants to do what his laners actually want to do, so nothing happens. And I think that's kind of how Peanut's summer split went.
I don't want to really offend Fnatic fans or anything, but I feel like Peanut is like a mechanically gifted Broxa. And by that, like in Rocks Tigers, he got a lot out of the fact that Smeb always put a lot of pressure top, and the two of them really had a good system where Peanut would do often an early gank top. They would put shallow vision, they would spot the enemy jungler doing something, and then he would come back and like they would 1v1 the enemy jungle off of the early gold that he had from the gank top, off of the fact that Smeb had pressure from the early gank top, and off of the fact that they had vision off of the gank. And I think that he really, really got used to playing around top lane in this way. And then the way Faker plays is that he isn't necessarily going to leave lane where he's knocking on the enemy turret to back up the jungler on these like weird aggressive invades as much. Like, he'll ward for sure, absolutely, but I think that he wants to pressure his laner, and if the jungler is doing stuff that doesn't necessarily make sense at the given moment. He's not necessarily going to leave lane to back up the jungle. Like, he wants his jungle to ward his lane for him, and then this is what's good. And then Faker has been also, just in general, I feel like this team has been trying to have more pressure about bot lane, and Bang and Wolf aren't really pressure bot laners to me. Like, they're really good at staying even or getting a little bit ahead, but they're not like super high pressure bot laners, and I think that has really broken down the team as well. And so for me, that limits the effectiveness of Peanut, and he only really had like one way that he played the game. People had this like battle ward stuff, which was like really just this over aggressive way of playing around top and top. Does anyone disagree with that or have anything to nitpick that they want?
I pretty much agree. I think the Huni Peanut combination is probably ideal if they want to do well at the tournament, but you don't know how it actually will work out.
Yeah, the only thing I'm going to add is that I think, so like, when I've been talking to people, because I didn't put Huni and Peanut on my lists, they're then surprised that I really like the decision to bring Huni, because obviously that was kind of, everyone was looking at SKT going into this tournament after the loss, and they were like, what are they going to do? Who are they going to bring? And I love the idea that they're bringing Huni, because it shows me that they're really focusing on what they did wrong versus Longzhu, and they're preparing for Longzhu, because in their heads they're thinking, well, this is the team that's going to give us the most trouble at this tournament. And in that regard, I think it's setting a really cool scenario where Huni could, come back and have a really amazing, strong tournament. And I like the decision making there, even though I didn't include Huni and Peanut on my lists here.
I wanted to ask you guys about Ambition, because everyone put Ambition second except for me. So,
I think Ambition personally, it's pretty much like the dream meta as far as the patch will go. You can play all tank junglers all the time. Obviously, middle lane Lee Sin might come back, but even then, it's really not that big of a deal. And
you guys are not mentioning Ezreal. This is going to be the Ezreal jungle. We're going to have Karma top Ezreal jungle. Can you, this is going to be fantastic.
Let's go.
In my opinion.
Let's go.
Yeah. Well, if that happens, I'm not really sure what will happen to like the herbivore junglers, I guess. But it's
Ambition could still be fine in that scenario, because he basically started playing jungle.
An Ardent Sensor Karma and top lane or some shit like this, right? Yeah. Like, then he'll be fine. Like, if he has like a Tom Kench or an Ardent Sensor top laner or something like this, he'll have shields and he can do weird Ambition invades and he'll be fine. It's fine. Whatever. Yeah. Just do your thing, dude.
When you think about Ambition when he first came in, the reason why I actually think Ezreal jungle could be a weirdly strong pick for him is because he was basically a fifth laner, right? And like, his whole evolution as a jungler has been evolving past that, where he's not just someone who's AFK farming and then joining up for team fights, which is kind of that's still, I feel, his default style, but the transition has been that he no longer does that all the time, right? So that's actually why, weirdly, I think maybe Ezreal jungle could be good, especially if Crown is performing well and pushing out mid. But that's the question. Ambition was, so the reason why I put Ambition so highly is, again, for meta reasons that Xander mentioned, so I won't go over those again, but it's also because I think when we look at how Samsung got here, Crown, until very recently, was having a very tough split, and a lot of the salvation of Samsung. So even like when they were winning in some of their games, I was just like, man, this team just does not look as good as they used to. And a lot of those wins were due to Cuvée and then also Ambition, mainly because they had trouble playing Haru, because Haru would do all these. So if you think Ambition does risky invades, which he does, Haru is a lot more of those, and that requires a lot of mid lane pressure. And because he wasn't getting mid lane pressure, I think Haru really struggled because he wasn't receiving that support from pushing lanes that he had in spring, and that's why he looked, one of the reasons why he looked so good in spring. And so I think the fact that they could bring Ambition in, he could be kind of this rock and center for the team, is super, super important. And it's definitely one of the reasons why Samsung is here. And that's why I've ranked him so highly.
I think an interesting thing about Ambition is that I think he's really good at understanding when he has to go mid and reinforce mid. When mid is losing pressure, he helps Crown push out. He's really good at warding around mid. These are all things that I think made him good in the absence of Haru, or that were really useful for the team. Like, he was very attuned to when mid will struggle or when mid will have a hard time, and I think that is really the thing that helped Samsung. But I feel like this is just this is definitely something that other junglers are doing, right, at this tournament. So for me, I can't give Ambition too much credit for the fact that he's compensating for something that is an issue on his team. So for me, that's why I didn't necessarily put him up as highly, because I feel like, just even looking at the Misfits G2 final, Maxlor was doing really similar things, right? When mid would lose pressure, Maxlor would be mid at the right time, and he would help push out the lane. And he was playing the Sejuani, and it was really similar setups and things like this. So it was just like, well, if I'm going to give Ambition a ton of credit for doing this, then immediately I'm giving other junglers who do the same thing a lot of credit. Obviously, Ambition has other stuff. Like, he's been a great player for a really long time. He's very good at understanding where he can go on the map and understanding the strong sides and everything else and standard jungle stuff. So, like, the criteria for jungle for me at this tournament is pretty low, just because there aren't a lot of great junglers. But I don't think you then take things away from junglers who are great junglers. Like, Blank, who I think understands how to play to pressure extremely really well. Part of the reason why I think SKT struggled is because they don't necessarily have a jungler who's good at playing when the lanes are losing. I think both Blank and Peanut are junglers who excel or do better when lanes already have pressure and don't necessarily help their lanes get pressure, so that's potentially a mark against them. And I think Condi and Karsa have a lot of really great strong points that they've been able to demonstrate both in and out of the tank meta, though obviously I think both of them have had trouble having as much of an impact on their team in summer as they did in spring. But I think that that's also just generally part of the meta. Why we aren't putting a lot of stock into top, why we aren't putting a lot of stock into jungle is just because of meta-related reasons. But these players are genuinely considered great. So I didn't necessarily feel like taking that away from them just to reward Ambition for doing something that is great and fundamental to what his team needs to do to succeed, but isn't something that other junglers aren't doing, I guess.
Well, that's all really fair. I think I just one more thing for Ambition, because you mentioned he was like really experienced and whatnot. I also value that there's probably not going to be a lot of variance in his performance. I think that's pretty important. That's why I kept someone like Karsa off my list in general.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, I've always had a love-hate relationship with Karsa, because a lot of people like to give Karsa a ton of credit, but he even self-proclaims he is a gambler, right? And so for me, a player like that, it's really difficult to rate over other players on his team like Mabel or Sword Art. So.
Yeah, I've pretty much watched like every game of his career, so like I'm well aware of what he does. It was even worse when he started. He's gotten better, but I've never felt too good about how he plays. He's very gank heavy, big, and if it doesn't work, then they just lose, and it kind of sucks. But either way,
I think the one thing that I really like about him is that he's really good at reinforcing whatever pressure his team gets with vision, and so that's something that I put on Karsa a lot. I think to an extent he got too much credit for that from me, because LMS junglers don't really contest Scuttle as much as they should. And so Karsa is just like, I'm going to get this Scuttle crab for free, and I'm going to get this one for free, and my lanes never have to do anything to be scared or waste gold on wards, because we have all of the river vision control now.
Yeah, it's kind of funny actually, because there was like one game at Rift Rivals that I actually blamed him entirely, because they eating a one Scuttle crab and they lost because of it, I swear. And as There's something very funny about that. 'Cause he always goes for early crabs, but either way.
What Karsa giveth, Karsa also taketh away, apparently.
Yeah. He's also bad at tanks. I think he's always been bad at tanks.
No.
He's okay at tanks. His Gragas used to be really good. Not so much the split, but either way.
And then you guys had Clear Love, right? Both of you had Clear Love? Yeah.
Yeah.
As your
I had
number
him
5.
fifth, yeah.
Okay. Let's hear the great
I can
Clear
explain.
Love over Smithy argument.
Wait, did I have? Oh, that was you, Emily. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, because I put my 6th out, right? So,
Mhm.
so Xmithy was my 6th, and Clear Love was my 5th, and it's really. So I was not expecting EDG to win. Sorry, that sounds really
Literally
awful.
no one was expecting EDG.
No
to
one.
win.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the cases, and again, maybe it's just because the jungle pool, as we said, is very weird, where I really rated his contributions across the years domestically to EDG very highly. I definitely think that even though I don't necessarily even see him as like particularly consistent jungler all the time, that was like a team. I don't even know if it's like leadership, but the things that he does for that team have just been so successful domestically that it was really hard for me to ignore. Whereas Xmithy, who's another jungler that like even talking to people in NA who watch a lot of NA, I feel like his contributions are still very undervalued a lot of the time. I think he draws on a vast amount of experience to make really good reactive decisions, and he's very smart. I think, I don't know. See, this is one of those things where I probably could have been argued to dropping Clear Love down, but in the moment when we submitted our lists, I just really valued his contribution to the team and how many LPL championships he has led EDG to, along with Mako. I mean, obviously Mako I rated a lot more highly than Clear Love, and he's another driving force behind how that team wins. So.
Unfortunately, most people would counter with Clear Love at Worlds but either way.
Oh yeah, that's where when I previously brought up like domestic and international success, and that's a fair meme, and Kelsey will have a lot more to say on this as well, but like I think Clear Love is a double-edged sword in a lot of ways in that regard, where he is going to consistently be getting these domestic championships, but once they get to an international level, it doesn't work as well. So
it's funny that you say double-edged sword, because that is literally the title of EDG's final documentary video that they did on their victory, but it's about
Really?
Scout. But anyway.
Oh.
He's kind of one too, but
yeah.
I think the logic Aaron used to describe it was like that Scout is a player who he's very stubborn, but once you teach him something, you don't have to bother teaching him again, and that makes him a double-edged sword. And I was just like, sure, I guess.
I don't think
maybe
that's
you don't
the
have
right
the
use of
same
the idiom.
impression of double-edged sword that I do. I guess like it's like his stubbornness makes him very also like he doesn't have to be taught, or he doesn't have to change his mind multiple times, but it also means that he doesn't change his mind multiple times.
yeah, that's a bit of a weird.
So
that's an interesting
fine.
interpretation of double-edged sword.
Yeah, it's fine. But the thing that was also interesting about the documentary is that EDG kept saying, well, you can't say we aren't used to losing anymore, and this reverse sweep was very important to us because we historically have had a really bad mental, so the fact that we were able to do this reverse sweep means that we can actually show up to Worlds and do well now, and I'm just like, yes, it's exactly what that means. Good job, guys. So I don't know. Maybe Clear Love, this will be the Worlds where he does super well, because he worked on his mentality, and Emily and Xander will look like geniuses, so it's good.
Yeah.
Woo!
Alright, so I think that's good about jungle. Did anyone else have any questions about the jungle stuff? Because...
everything else looked pretty ordinary. They were in accordance for the most part. I already said why I didn't like Karsa, so there we go.
Mid lane! Yeah, this is one of the ones that people were the most offended by my placement, because I put BDD under Bjergsen. So obviously you guys didn't. It feels weird that I'm asking you to justify putting BDD over Bjergsen, because it's apparently the default, but go ahead anyway.
So I put Faker, BDD, and Xiaohu above Bjergsen. And Faker, I guess, is like, we're not even going to bother talking about him since it was unanimous. BDD is, so the strikes against him are obviously longevity. He did not play in spring. And previously he was on a team that was relegated. The reason why I value BDD so highly is because I think without BDD and his control over that mid lane, a lot of stuff goes wrong for Longzhu. Mainly because they have a jungler who is very much still learning the position at a professional level. And whenever you have a jungler that is trying to make that transition from solo queue to pro, you need a really strong mid laner. And I think BDD has just really established himself as this force in the mid lane. And by that, I don't mean like, because I feel like when people watched his highlight reels, they expected him to just come in and be dumpstering people, right? And be like popping off on Zed and 1v1ing people. And that's not why I value BDD, although he can probably do those things as well. It's because he has just been this immovable object in their mid lane. And that is so important for Longzhu, especially when you have a top laner that you're really dedicating a lot of resources to. And then obviously we'll talk about the bot lane because I rated both of their bot lane players as number one in their positions. But I think on a team where you have that fledgling jungler who is going to be trying to get top lane ahead because that is the way that they play, I think that immovable force in the mid lane is just really invaluable to Longzhu.
I mean, I feel... oh, sorry. I didn't realize you weren't done.
No, but you should just cut me off, pretty much.
I feel similarly, but I feel like Bjergsen does the same thing for TSM, except that like he is the movable object in mid lane, and he has a longer track record. And everyone says, but Kelsey, he's not in Korea. And I guess that's the major argument you make, right? But I think that for me, Bjergsen is the immovable object in TSM. And for me, I would rely much more on Longzhu's bottom lane than Longzhu's mid in terms of giving credit. And I guess this is where I really disagreed with a lot of people who were happy putting 4 Longzhu players in the top 6 of players at Worlds, right? The all esports stuff. Because I think that Khan and BDD, for example, Longzhu really, really heavily prioritizes winning lane matchups for these players. And a lot of times for Khan, he just gets it for free because people want to play tank top anyway. So I guess for me, my issue is that like if I'm rating impact on team at all, I kind of feel like BDD falls back a little bit in that regard. So thoughts, Xander?
That's actually really fair because obviously the bot lane is pretty much the core of Longzhu, and it is what allows their solo laners to achieve so much. But I also the reason why I have BDD number 2 over players like Bjergsen and Xiaohu is you know, it's been beaten to death like how often he's been compared to Faker, but it's almost like he's slightly more selfless. It feels like he's there a lot more for his actual teammates, especially Cuz, who well, obviously needs a lot more help than most players. But it's lane pressure in mid is always important. That's just how League of Legends works, and I think I guess maybe it was Korean bias. Like I favored him in a favorite hit is summer performance overall over players who, or over someone like Bjergsen, who's obviously been the immovable object in TSM for years now.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's fair. Generally, I think it's even reasonable to expect BDD to do better than Faker at Worlds, but for me, I really am happy to reward Faker for always being like the core TSM, and I feel like a lot of things that let TSM down are poor prep for best of one group stage, generally poor understanding of the meta, just kind of falling apart in teamfights and things like this that I don't necessarily always blame Bjergsen for. And people are always saying, like, if Bjergsen is this great guy, he needs to step up and carry. I feel like that's not the problem that TSM have internationally. Like, I don't feel like that's the issue. I feel like TSM are just used to having so much pressure mid, and a lot of times they get it even internationally, but then what the side lanes are able to do with that pressure changes. And that's a lot of the issue with TSM that I see. So I guess, I don't know. For me, this is the argument. Obviously, there are the IEM performances where Bjergsen falls apart against Unicorns of Love mid laners of all people. But generally speaking, I feel like Bjergsen has done really well internationally just in terms of being a good laner and having the same kind of pressure, so I still reward him for that. Okay, that's reasonable, except probably everything seems reasonable except what I just said, which is fair. You guys, actually, I think both of you had Xiaohu over where I had him, which was 4th. I think both of you had Xiaohu 3rd, right?
Yeah, I had him 3rd.
Yeah, 3rd.
Over Bjergsen, yeah. Correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, so why do you guys like Xiaohu so much?
He makes playing Corki look like it requires a lot of skill. No, sorry, that sounds terrible, and that's an awful joke, and I'm sorry for it. I think if you are going to be trying to take away from Xiaohu's like statistical performance, it will be like champion choice. But I also like, I don't know, it's weird to me that people kept leaving that up in the first place. I also just think that, again, I am really heavily prioritizing his value in the mid lane and what his push in the mid lane allows his side laners to do. I also respect his roams a lot. And I don't know. I mean, I guess, so I put him above Bjergsen and Maple, who are my other two picks. And I think Xander left off Maple completely. So who did you put Xiaohu above?
I put him above Bjergsen and Xie.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to chime in on Xiaohu a little bit too. I guess for me, in my head, it feels like, yeah, even though Bjergsen like literally is TSM, like I felt like a lot of RNG success, specifically this split, was involved with Xiaohu and the support main. Mm-hmm. But it's just I guess that's why I ended up putting him above Bjergsen overall. And also, I think he just had better team fights this split too. Yeah.
I think for me, the Xiaohu thing is really interesting because I think he's really a great player. And I called him better than Rookie this split and everything else. But I think the issue for me with Xiaohu is you have in your mind the picture of him doing this like Elder Dragon hard carry, a solo Elder Dragon hard carry, the subsequent fight Corki type game, right? But then you think about all the times where he's had those sick, insane performances, and they've generally been on Corki, right? The solo carry games are usually on Corki. Are we rating him on the solo carry games? Because if we're rating him on the solo carry games, then it becomes problematic thinking about what champions that he's able to do that on. Under what circumstances is he able to do that on? So outside of those, I think that he had a lot of really great performances on Talia. I think he had a lot of really great performances on LeBlanc. And he did have a lot of like really good carry performances in general earlier in the split when the team's roster was inconsistent and everything else. But the really amazing Xiaohu, I just haven't seen as much of as I would like to put him higher than 4th. And if he's not higher than 4th, then he's been... If he's not doing those things, then he's similar in quality to BDD, similar in quality to Bjergsen, and being able to keep pressure mid and things of that nature. Also, like, I think this is less relevant in Xiaohu's case, but the last World Championship was really poor from him. And I think the reason why it's less relevant is because going into that Worlds, he was really poor in LPL Summer. Whereas going into that MSI last year, he had a really good LPL Spring. So, like, he's consistent in terms of so far, in terms of how he's played domestically, translating that into international events. So far, I think that you can expect that, but it's just still a small sample size. So again, because I want to reward players I think are great, and not just players who should be good, I ended up putting him a little bit lower. I think number 5 was definitely the most interesting one, because we all had different answers, and this was the 4-way tie. So let's start with Emily. I forget what mid laner.
I had Maple.
Maple, right? Okay.
I had Maple, and then I had Scout as my 6th. So if it hadn't been Maple, it would have been Scout. And I know that Xander is going to argue Maple down because he had a rough split, right? So
yeah, he was bad, but
yeah. Like, especially in comparison to what you would typically expect from him as a player. But the reason why I felt it was really difficult for me to leave Maple off of this list is just his domestic and international consistency elsewhere, and his value to the team over time. And so even though, like, it's definitely not something looking at these lists and really talking about our criteria that I valued as highly as Kelsey. This was one of the specific cases where I'm like, I would like to reward Maple for typically being that really consistent force in the mid lane. And obviously this split was not the best one to look at if you want to look at like good performances from him. But that's kind of what put him over the edge with Scout for me, because I mean they use the double-edged sword analogy themselves, and I'm going to use it a little differently because I think Scout can sometimes, he's improved in consistency a lot, but sometimes he can be also a little inconsistent, and he's had less of a body of work to look at, and so that's why when I was evaluating there you go. That's why, so when I was like debating over those two, that's why I Maple edged out Scout when I was looking at my 5th best.
That's interesting. I kind of felt that's why I kept Maple out of top 5, because it feels like his effective champion pool is like much smaller. Like, we're at a point where like Flashwolves have to like panic pick LeBlanc a lot, because that feels like that's the one champion that Maple really consistently still performs on. But also he just feels I don't know, he just doesn't have the same lane pressure anymore. He doesn't like do, if you give him an even matchup, he'll even lose it now. And he was definitely outshined by like Fofo, and even occasionally when he played against Mission specifically, this is the Hong Kong Attitude later, he even looked bad there. He didn't look good there either. And that was kind of a red flag for me, because Mission isn't great. He just kind of pushes lane and that's it, yeah.
Yeah. I think it was interesting to Maple's split has been interesting to me, and again, like, this is where I ended up cutting off a lot of people that we're talking about, is just because I feel like if you had a bad summer full stop, I'm not putting you on my list. And so I couldn't put Maple or Crown on my list by that criteria. I think that I was more willing to consider players like Perks, who had a good second half. For example, I was fine with that. But generally speaking, I wouldn't put Maple or Crown on my list because I felt like the vast majority of the summer was poor from them. I think Scout was someone I did consider, though, even after I was kind of harping on him. Because even if I feel like he only plays 2 champions, like I think EDG are basically a 2-person team in a lot of ways, with Mako and Scout. And a lot of LPL teams went off of their mid support dynamic a lot and controlling the jungle and the map in that way. So it was very essential, and it was very meaningful that EDG were able to win LPL when that's generally the meta. It says a lot about Scout, it says a lot about Mako. So I think that that's another player that I kind of considered. Okay. Mid discussion, interesting stuff. AD carry, the list is probably about to come out as we're discussing this. This is the one that people I think are going to be most upset about from my perspective. Like, if you guys were offended about Bjergsen over BDD and not including Huni and Peanut, then I think the fact that I don't have Bang on my list is really terrible. But let's talk about what you guys had for AD carry, since this is more interesting.
So my list was Prey, Bang, Mystic, UZI, and actually Ruler, which I think Ruler is actually the weirdest pick that I have on here. Prey was unanimous. Bang is going to be a contentious pick, I think, putting him so highly, and I waffled a bit on
everyone had him
listing
second
him
for me, so.
Well, it was a tough decision for me between him and Mystic for the 2-3 spot. Mm-hmm. I think the reason why I still put Bang so highly is because so he did not have a particularly strong or consistent summer performance, but a lot of the circumstances behind that. So putting aside, because I think one big thing that we really have to consider when talking just about Bang and Lane is that Wolf had a really rough latter half of the split because the meta changed. And after Rift Rivals, they ended up doing this weird thing where they really tried to focus Bang on hyper carries with Wolf on these continuing laning supports that were also like shield protect supports, and it didn't work out at all. And Wolf had a lot of difficulty matching roams from opposing supports, which broke down their lane a lot. So I'm not even talking about the 2v2, I'm just talking about how you're playing the entire bottom half of the map. But the reason why I still ended up putting Bang second is because I think a lot of his individual misplays were due to off-field issues by his own admission. And that's not necessarily something that I like to consider, or it's not something I even want to have to consider. But in this specific case, I made an exception because I think a lot of the things that happened to him this past split with dealing with a lot of incoming flame and people calling for him to be benched because of things he said on stream, and SKT's honestly really poor response to that really affected his individual play. And I don't necessarily want to dock him for those reasons when I don't think it'll be an issue whatsoever at the World Championship. So that's why I rated him so highly in second.
Bang second for me was okay. So the summer wasn't great. He obviously, like you said, he didn't. Wolf, the bot line was just really discombobulated in general. I guess they didn't really work. It's not just the 2v2, like you said, didn't work together. They didn't work with their team. Lane pressure wasn't in the same place, but it's hard to imagine that those problems are going to continue. It doesn't feel like it's the same as just like players like Crown or Maple or players like that I kind of left off because they had such bad summers, I don't think it's necessarily the same with Bang. I didn't see the same individual deterioration. And I think in these kinds of drop back AD carry metas where you have the Ardent Sensor as a potential thing, I think that he's still a very high candidate for being a strong performer.
Again, I think I don't necessarily always rate Bang that highly because I think laning is important, and I've never really thought of Bang as like a huge laner. So for me, like all the AD carries I put on my lists are actually just kind of sick laning AD carries. Like I think Prey is a really impressive laning AD carry in terms of like he's able to control the lane on champions like Ashe and stuff when he plays Ashe, or just all the sorts of like his engage sense is amazing. Like in a lot of cases, Gorilla roams and is able to leave him to 1v2 the lane, and it's just really, for me, Prey is a really amazing player in almost every aspect of the game. And even last year when people were saying Bang is so good, like I was still giving Prey a lot of credit over Bang for that. So I don't know, I think that for me it's super easy for me to rate Prey really highly and then put Bang down. Though of course I think that like Bang has had great team fighting, all of that other stuff is very true, but I think like it's just really hard for me to not give credit to AD carries that I feel like had really good laning splits or who have traditionally been extremely strong players, especially in a meta where I feel like having pressure bottom is so important. Even if you're playing like these scaling AD carries, I still think that pressure bottom is extremely important, and winning bot lane and bot side is extremely important, like dragon fights. Having enemy jungle control is really important. Being able to have your support roam to mid is really important. So that's for me why I ended up having like criticizing him so heavily that I put him off of my list. I also think that I really wanted to reward players like Mystic, Reckless, who generate a lot of control for their team, and those teams like play around the fact that their AD carry is just so good at having this type of control. So for me, my list went Prey, Mystic, Reckless, Sven, and UZI. And again, like you can sort of see some sort of consistency in the logic in terms of strong laning, everything else. Obviously, I am an EU China type person, right? Like I overrate these teams. I'm extremely biased, which is why I didn't have Xiaohu very high, and you know everything else. But that's the the issue is yeah, for me that's why I went for this, and this is probably going to be the point that people consider the most controversial about my lists. So. I think you guys didn't consider the EU AD carries as impressive. Like I know Xander had double lift.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I can explain my list actually. Is Prey, Bang, Mystic, Reckless, double lift. Double lift I guess is kind of like the big hipster one here because I
mean Tyler also had him, so.
Oh really?
He ended up actually making the official list over Reckless, I think.
Oh,
because
okay,
Tyler had him as number 3. So.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I tried to talk him out of that, I'm pretty sure, but it was I don't know, when it comes to like I gave Double Lift a lot of credit because Sven and UZI were also the other AD carries I was considering because as you said, lane pressure is really important right now. I ended up giving it to him because I feel like Biopross had a lot of trouble bot lane this split, but like just adapting to what champions he needed to play. Obviously that became a bit of a meme as well, but I think he puts in a lot of work for the bot side of the map specifically, and I think when they do have the strong mid game, when they do have the mid game leads, he's a big reason why they're able to accelerate so well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why I gave him so much credit and gave him number 5. Although I did have like Mystic and Reckless above him.
I was also really impressed by Double's team fighting this split, so I actually did consider mentioning him. I just think that there are so many AD carries at this tournament that you can put on the list as well. I think this tournament is really AD carry heavy, obviously because AD carry is really important. So.
Mm-hmm. And for one tournament, the Flashless AD carry is low, but it's not because he's terrible. So I'll take it. Just wait. Betty's gonna be top 5 next year. You'll see it all. I promise.
Promise. Okay, that's good.
Hey, honest, he plays like Prey. He's like baby Prey, except he's Taiwanese.
He's like baby Prey, except he's Taiwanese. I don't know, man. Yeah. I think that Prey just is so good, like actually insane. But yeah. I mean, you can't, like, this team, almost all of the successful team fights that they had in the first year of Rock's Tigers formation were based off of Price engages. Not Gorillas, not Smebs, Price. So, yeah. Anyway, those are kind of the 80 carry lists. Emily, did you have anything you wanted to talk about?
I think my only hipster pick was probably Ruler. And I think, so in talking about Samsung this split, the reason why I wanted to give Ruler kind of a shout out here is that he's improved, in my opinion, immensely. And he's done it with a support who has fallen really out of meta and had a really difficult. So, like, if we were talking about how Wolf was struggling in lane, with Bang in terms of not just in the lane, but communicating with the rest of his team, etc. Core JJ was kind of the person behind Ruler last year, right? Like, he was the one who, you know, kind of carried Ruler through these lanes, and the two of them came up as this strong bot lane because Core was such a really strong laning support, and they subbed him in at the exact right time. And I think that this split has been a really interesting exercise in watching Ruler grow as a player. He went from someone who KT like totally banned out in spring playoffs and absolutely got destroyed, to a player who is a lot more flexible and can take care of himself even when his support is really struggling. And that's why I wanted to give him the shout out. So I just wanted to talk about Ruler for like 2 seconds. It was more than 2 seconds, but
I think that's fair. I think Ruler is really strong players as well. Like, it's if I didn't put a player on my list, it's not because I think they're bad, you know? Like, I think ADC is the most stacked role at the championship.
Oh, yeah.
Like, when we were talking about, I think people think that mid is super stacked, and I agree. But when you get to 5th, you're talking about, like, different types of flaws that the players have that are kind of glaring and that are keeping them from definitively being on the list. But when you get to 80 carries, it's almost like you're talking about which little bit of impact is slightly better than this little bit of impact. So for me, I think 80 carry is definitely the most stacked role at this World Championship. So support was actually also another one that didn't have that much variation, I think. Most, except of course, I put Sword Art number 1.
The Sword Art.
Hell yeah! Hell yeah! I fully endorse it, even though I didn't.
And we had talked a little bit about it. The other controversial stuff was like Ola versus Mithy versus Ming versus Wolf, I think.
Yeah.
That's kind of my understanding of excuse me, why that's the case. I think we all sort of agree that Gorilla, Mako, and Sword Art should definitely be top 3, right? In a particular order. Or obviously you guys are going to give Gorilla a lot of credit. I think the reason why I ended up putting Gorilla second over first had a lot to do with just what I felt was the overall team impact. Once you get through all of the things about support that are like mechanics, you know, pressure in lane, pressure in invades, how good are the roams, how many champions do they play, how important, and then you get to how important are they to the team. I feel like Gorilla gets dwarfed a little bit, just a little tiny bit, by the other two. Yeah. And of course, like, I put Mako lower just because I think Sword Art has more longevity. So then I have, like, So I ended up with Sword Art, Gorilla, Mako in that regard. So for me, I feel like Flash Wolves for a really long time has been Sword Art. And when they've had their worst showings, it's because Sword Art hasn't been able to have the impact that he is in terms of setting up and picking fights and being able to get them the pressure in lane to take the first turret and lane swap really effectively or whatever else it is has been across meta. So for me, like, Sword Art is so important to Flash Wolves. And so that's why I put him first, because I feel like this is probably controversial to say, but I think Gorilla, Mako, and Sword Art are all very similarly skilled players.
No, I agree with that, actually.
I would say that... Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so my reasoning behind Gorilla is going to be a bit weird, because when I talked previously about my criteria and experiencing how a team functions personally, this is where I'm actually giving Gorilla a lot of the credit, and unfortunately it's a lot of intangibles that people won't see, so maybe that's unfair. But I just did want to take a minute to talk just about Gorilla as a person, because he's always the person who is picking the team up or guiding the team through everything. And I've seen him do this on multiple teams, where he is the person who is like consciously like tapping someone on the shoulder, or like hilariously at the Longzhu press conference at LCK finals, he was like showing Cuz and Khan how to use the mics because they didn't know how to do it. Or just little simple stuff like that. Like before the games even started, I saw him like touring around with Khan and Cuz and like showing them where stuff was and where setup was. And I think his position as a leader on this team is just super, super valuable. Outside of like how he plays in game, which I think his in-game impact is really similar to Mako and Sword Art, I think out of game impact or just like in the booth, it's so valuable to have Gorilla there just as a presence. And so maybe it's unfair because, again, these are a lot of things that you're not necessarily going to see unless you see their interviews or you meet them in person or you watch them. You watch any sort of content like outside of game, or you just watch them in the booth and how they interact with each other. But that's one of the reasons why I just really, really value Gorillas, because I feel like he's the heart of the team.
Sure. I think the issue, I guess, for me is that my understanding is that I might be wrong on Sword Art, but Mako and Sword Art have similar roles within the context of their teams in terms of leadership and stuff like this. So
yeah, that's true.
For me, like, yeah, you can give Gorilla a lot of credit for that. And this is why I just don't rate intangibles in general, is because if you know more about a team, you're going to know more about who the leader is of that particular team and the impact that they have in the comms or in whatever else of that particular team than you do if you really study like another team. So you might talk to the team or have information on the team, and then you really, really know or really have a good idea of like, okay, this guy is so important to his particular team and everyone swears by it, but I haven't necessarily talked as much to Flash Wolves, or I haven't necessarily talked as much to... So for me, like, if you talk about captaincy leadership, that was Mako for EDG this year. Like, Clearlift stepped back, stepped down, and then Mako had to fill in that role. He had to teach everyone, he had to learn how to encourage people, and he ended up leading this team of players that everyone put down back to an LPL title. So that's like really huge. So yeah, I would give Mako a ton of credit for leadership, but I know more about EDG and how EDG work than I do about Longzhu and how Longzhu works. So that's for me like why I can't really do intangible stuff that much.
Yeah, that's definitely hard to weigh. Sword Art's also been the leader of Flash Wolves for like 2 years now, and he had to transition into that after Stake retired, so that was also kind of a reason why I think his play was a little up and down in 2016. So there's like I think all three players are like so close in like pretty much everything they bring to their teams that it is kind of like this player does this slightly better, this player does this slightly better. I think I just want to share one bit about Sword Art. I think the one thing that he does better than both supports is he uses Fog of War better than I think any player I've ever seen personally. And I wish he was more popular, so that could be highlighted. But oh well.
I think he's.
I don't see why he's not popular. He's such a nice, funny person too.
Yeah, I think the big thing between these supports and why a lot of people would probably, I did put Sword Art number 3 because I feel like, while they're all very close mechanically, Sword Art has less moments where he does make the crucial play, I think. And even though he is most famous for Thresh and Alistair, sometimes it feels like it doesn't happen all the time. I don't know. And also, I think playing with NL for a while also hurt his reputation there, where he just didn't protect his 80. I want to see Sword Art also adjust to maybe, because they experimented a lot with playing around Betty, just because they wanted to try new champions. They even put MMD on Fiora. They were crazy. They were doing everything. It's just I do want to see him in a scenario where he does actually have to protect the AD carry and where he has to play, where bot lane pressure becomes even more important, I would say. That's why I didn't give him as much credit, even though I could easily put him number 1 as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then when it gets down to it, it's okay, Ola. I think I probably I rate Ola definitely lower than everyone else on the panel.
Yeah.
I think part of it is that a lot of what Ola does is just super ballsy shit that he shouldn't necessarily get away with. And I think that against teams like TSM, it was really obvious that kind of stuff happens. He gets punished a lot more for it. And so that's why I have more of an issue with Ola than I think other people. So, but what do you guys like about Ola?
Okay, so I've been watching him for the last few years, obviously. He played with Hong Kong Esports. He does have that whole, big play mentality, but I still think that when he has, a jungler that leads him around, so it was Dinter in Taiwan, now it's Smithy in NA, I think he does become, a really strong... he controls the map really well in those scenarios. He doesn't do it so well when he doesn't have someone to lead him. I think he's kind of like a weapon. Someone has to hold him so that he does what he needs to do, and I think his mechanical peak is also so high that I just had to give him credit for that, because the things that he can do are insane. Even though I did mention that I really value consistency. That's why he's not number 1 or anything like that. Even though in the past I thought there was one point in his career where I did think he was better than Sword Art for that reason. It's even more varied now. So obviously you didn't even have him top 5, so that's why I would have him as the lower support. And I think kind of I just feel like he's a very important cog to IMT, and I feel like if they had a less forward support, they would probably and also a less aggressive laning support, I think Cody's son would probably suffer a little bit, and I think that IMT's identity in general would suffer, even though it's kind of a weird one. Yeah. See,
I think it'll get them in more trouble as time progresses that he's like that.
That's true.
Because of Cody's son, actually, in particular. So I think that's another issue that I had with him. What do you think about him, Emily?
I was actually going to say a really similar thing to the way he interacts with the jungler. But I also think, so looking at my list, if we'd been arguing this out, I don't know, it was really close for me between Ala and Wolf, and I think what ended up happening is I just valued recent performance a lot when considering this. And maybe I shouldn't have, because I think it was really contentious that I left Wolf off my list.
I think most of us did, didn't we?
Yeah. I think all of us.
I think only Tyler. I think Tyler put number 3.
Yeah, Tyler had him.
Sure,
but
okay. But I mean, I don't know. I waffled back and forth between those two a lot. and I decided
Tyler had
on
him fifth,
Ola
so.
just for yeah. So it's weird because once I got past Mithy, which are like, so we look at, I had Gorilla Mako, Sword Art, Mithy, and then it was between Ala and Wolf, and so those four, obviously what I'm valuing a lot in a support is team leadership, right? Which is something I already said when talking about Gorilla. So it's weird because even though I do see Wolf as an important part of SKT, despite the fact that he had a really rough split. Like if you look at core JJ, very similar thing happened to Wolf, although I think Wolf played better. Like arguably. I don't know. I guess I see Ala as a more important piece of the team. And maybe that's not fair. Like maybe Wolf is gonna come out and prove me wrong. And I hope he does. But like that was ultimately the deciding factor between settling on my fifth. Because then I included Wolf as sixth in case we were arguing it and there needed to be a tiebreaker.
Yeah, I think I ended up getting myself in a bunch of corners as well for saying that, like, okay, this player didn't have that great of a summer, so I'm not putting him on the list. I think that Mithy, again, was another player who had a really good upswing after Rift Rivals, and ended up being a player that I put on, but maybe shouldn't have been as high. Ming ended up being my fifth pick, because I think Ming has been really, really good all year. He's been a contender for top support in the LPL. As a rookie player, he's been able to play, like, the only two consistent members of that team have been Xiaohu and Ming. All the other players have been swapped out, like Let Me, Cora 1, UZI was swapped out for a couple of other AD carries occasionally, partly because of his wrist injury. You had MLXG swapped out, so I think that it's worth noting that Ming continued to perform well, regardless of the circumstances, and he was really good with engage supports. He got MVP for finding these picks, and the fact that RNG have a pick style makes Ming very important, so that's what I ended up arguing Ming for. Mithy, I think, is one of the most difficult ones to argue because he has struggled a little bit. He's been a little bit less consistent internationally, but all of us sort of had him because I think we acknowledge that he does have a really good form. He managed to get it back as time progressed throughout G2. He was really insane in the playoffs. So I think that Mithy is also just like his longevity and his presence for me meant that he had to be on my list as well. And his summer wasn't. I felt like Wolf's summer was much worse. So that's why I ended up putting Mithy over Wolf. Any other thoughts, guys?
No, I'm glad we did this. If we do this again, we're gonna have an actual discussion.
Conversation before
for sure
we release the list.
At least it'll be more interesting.
At least agree on a criteria beforehand before we just like throw a bunch of stuff together. Yeah, good stuff. Anyway, thanks you guys for watching, and I might release this afterwards, so if it does, then yay! Hopefully you enjoy the first day of playing. Bye.
Yeah. All right.